welcome in. If you have not seen this movie, you probably should not be here. But with that said, let's review The Passion of the Christ. Do we really need a spoiler warning for the Bible? Directed by Mel Gibson, who at this point had made Man Without a Face, which was his debut, Braveheart, maybe another one in the 90s, and then this. Produced by Icon Films, which is owned by Mel Gibson. So him and two partners, they funded this movie by themselves, meaning it is an independent rated R movie. And it became the highest grossing rated R movie of all time up until Deadpool knocked it out over 10 years later. The fact that this movie is in Arabic is one of the most impressive feats about this movie. The score and the slow motion are also two factors that make this movie so great. The soundtrack is full of like wind instruments and bass and vocalizing. It's pretty much very tribal. It's a lot like Skyrim, honestly. The score is a lot like Skyrim, with just a lot of nobody's singing lyrics. It's all vocalizing. We open in the woods and the lighting is all blue with mist surrounding the frame and this tribal song serving as the soundtrack. Jesus is in the woods imploring the Lord in prayer to find any other way to save the world. Jesus is begging God pretty much not to torture and kill him in the way that it's been ordained and predestined. This then cuts from that scene to Judas, who is selling Jesus for like 30 shillings. He's one of the 12 disciples. He's selling him to the high courts. Selling out. What was that? Stop. Okay, good. Got the lighting situation figured out? Okay. So yeah, Judas is selling out the Son of God to be killed. Meanwhile, Jesus is finishing up his prayer, but it's hard because the devil is right beside him, trying to distract and cast doubt. This is such an eerie scene and really adds a horror element to this movie. The devil and his demons are involved in this movie a lot, and the part that they play is always so menacing and creepy. In this next scene where the guards, this army of guards come to capture Jesus, the use of slow motion is incredible. And how it goes in and out of slow motion, it'll be like, whoa, whoa. It's a lot like the movie 300, TBH. They portray Peter cutting off the guard's ear and Jesus healing it and then surrendering to the guards. That is a scene I've only either read or seen portrayed in one other Jesus movie from like the 90s. But definitely not portrayed in the way that it is here. It's given such delicate attention to detail. Judas is kind of there to witness this, but he's hiding. And this starts his decline into this absolute demonic torment that he suffers from these demons. His storyline remains separate from Jesus for the rest of the movie up until he hangs himself because of his betrayal to Jesus and because he's being tormented by these demons in the form of kids. There are some flashbacks that are introduced into the narrative, and my favorite one is the first one actually, where Jesus is just building a table because he was a carpenter, and his mother Mary has this very lighthearted interaction with him in this scene. Really cool to see Jesus, just a casual Jesus, just building and joking around with his mom and stuff. It's cool because I don't really ever think of Jesus in that light. To me, he's such an icon. He's this larger-than-life character, and to reduce him to such a human emotion, human moment, of course he laughed. I'm sure Jesus had a lot of joy in his life. Anyways. So now Jesus is on trial, being accused of being a blasphemer. The scene is so frustrating because all these men accusing Jesus of using witchcraft to heal and falsely calling himself the Son of God. These people are so blindly mistaken. You know, it's like these people wouldn't know the Messiah if he slapped them in the face. Well, he's pretty much there doing that. Not really. They're slapping him in the face. Nothing Jesus can verbally say would do anything to change their mind. God truly intended for it to happen this way, so he allowed these men to remain blind until Jesus actually died. And then the earth begins to shake, and they're like, did we just make a mistake? People are so disappointing in this movie. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, despite telling Jesus he'd follow him anywhere. When the high priests bring him in front of Pontius Pilate and bring out an actual prisoner, Barbarus, who's a murderer, the people choose to let him go instead of Jesus. To them, the blasphemy is worse than a murderer. to them. You can visibly see evil working in this movie, gaining the upper hand for a very brief moment in time. Pilate says to the crowd and the high priest, "What do you want me to do with this guy?" They're like, "Crucify him!" And it just doesn't sit right with Pilate. He keeps looking over at Jesus like, what did you do to make them hate you like this? And that's just it. The inexplicability of it is why it is such a dark and evil presence. When Tyree was beat up by those 5 cops, it was inexplicable and inexcusable to such an extreme degree. It's just evil at that point. Like the spiritual realm has a heavy hand. The spiritual realm is more real than this physical realm. Then the second half of the movie starts, which is brutal. Unflinching, it is unforgiving. I have members of family who have not even seen this movie because of the second half of this movie and how gory and violent it is. And the fact that this movie doesn't even come close to how brutal it actually was. The Bible says that Jesus was unrecognizable as a human being after the beating that he took. If the movie had tried to go for that, it wouldn't have been released. It just wouldn't have happened. The shot of the devil walking in the crowd, just watching Jesus be whipped, I love that they included that because that was probably the happiest day of Satan's life up to that point, and he'll never experience anything like that again. He was there, he had a front row seat to watch all this happen. It's just, fun fact, Jim Caviezel actually got whipped by one of the whips, and these aren't any just regular whips. There's the handle, and then there's about 5 different, cord whips. And attached to the end are broken glass and shrapnel for extra slicing power. It's hardcore. The actor wore a pad on his back to protect himself as he's being whipped. Well, one of the whips overshot the pad and clawed his side and then ripped when the dude whipped it back. Jim Caviezel stood up and started screaming and cussing at the actors, which it would be funny to see Jesus cuss somebody out, but I digress. Actually, I don't, because Jim Caviezel was also struck by lightning when he was on the cross. The first assistant director also got struck, but whatever. They were up on this super exposed hill where the weather can do whatever it wants to them. And it also makes me think that there's something profound about him being struck by lightning up there on the cross. Man, the most disturbing shot in the whole movie to me is when the devil is, again, walking, but holding the Antichrist this time. It's horrifying, and it scarred me for life. The first time that I saw it. Just carrying the Antichrist in his arms, the Antichrist, looks over his shoulder with this smile, and it's so... it's really gross. So then they beat him to a bloody pulp, and they bring him before the court again. The high priest chant, "Finish it off, kill him." The horrific beating that he just took is not good enough for them. The evil in this world is going to see that Jesus die, because even evil doubts that he can carry this out, that he can carry the sins of the world on his body and rise from the grave. Pilate caves and says, "Do as they wish, kill him, crucify him." There is so much pressure, and they bully Pilate into making the decision, but I love that there's a struggle with him up until he caves. The mother and son relationship between Mary and Jesus is a silver lining through this movie. And what I mean by that is it's heartbreaking to watch Mary try and navigate the crucifixion of her earthly son. She's always in the crowd watching or wiping up Jesus' blood. She even says to Jesus when he's on the cross, "Let me die with you." Because this just isn't something she can handle. Who would? What mother could handle that? The scene where they are carrying the cross from the temple to the hill. I'm not trying to knock the scene because it is really powerful, but Jesus falls 5 times with the cross. I'm not even joking, 5 times. And by the time the 4th and 5th time happen, it's like, all right, dude. But anyways, it's not, it's so horrible to critique that scene because Then as they hammer his hands and feet to the cross and Jesus just shouts, "Father, forgive them." They don't know what they're doing. They just don't know. Again, he's begging for God to forgive them of their blindness. Then Jesus officially dies, and chaos ensues. The temple splits in half, the ground is shaking, the weather is weathering. All the high priests are in total regret. The devil is furious. There's that shot lifting up from purgatory, wherever he is, and he's just screaming at the sky because the prophecy has been complete. drastically lessening the devil's power. Satan got demoted that day, which is funny because he was the one kind of influencing people to push the crucifixion, so he did it to himself. But it was all predestined anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But before Jesus came, the devil and his demons had free reign on who they entered. They could make people sick, they could give people diseases, but when Jesus died on that cross, now with the power of Christ within us, demons and Satan can only influence by intrusive thoughts. You know, their power is much, much less. But the movie ends with Jesus rising from the grave, standing and walking out of frame, setting up the next movie that Mel Gibson is working on right now called The Passion of the Christ Resurrection. I remember watching this with my grandpa like 10 years ago, and when it ends, he was like, "Where's the rest of the story? That's only half of the story." And he's totally right. Because Jesus' death and resurrection affected the spirit realm so profoundly. That's what this next movie will be about, which I cannot wait for. They'll make an entire movie out of that shot of Satan screaming at the sky, pretty much. That's what I'm expecting. Since we all know the story, I felt that I wanted to talk about the movie, and so I tried to find the best ways to do that as opposed to just, like, telling you the Bible story, because we all know the Bible story. Well, maybe you don't, but, well, if you've seen the movie, then, okay, math. Man, I just don't know what else I can say about this movie. Oh, you know what? I will say this. Okay, so the movie The Exorcist, when that came out in 1973, did you know that 9 people died during the production of that movie? Well, they did. In very bizarre ways. Unlike they died on streets that was the name of something in the movie or the book, or they died involving numbers that included numbers in the book or movie. I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, but the making of The Exorcist was messed with, I think, by spiritual realms, because the movie is drawing attention to that. So the spirit realm doesn't want to be exposed. So, all that being said, that Mel Gibson, after he made this movie, had 10 years of hardship. And people, even to this day, are calling him a racist, you know, a misogynist, all that stuff. Which I understand. I understand that he made a fool of himself right after this movie came out. But there's a missing ingredient. He had that 10 years of hardship because he made this movie. He had to have been so spiritually attacked after making this movie. And it's not even a movie about, like, exorcism and demonic. This is a movie about Jesus. So, of course, the spirit realm is going to hate this movie being made. Or even talked about. I'll be attacked later today. But when people, you know, Mel Gibson, blah, 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 I'm like, dude, you're missing a whole piece of the puzzle in your judgment of him. Mel Gibson is my favorite actor. He's one of my favorite directors. And I love this man so much. Specifically because I know that he is a Christian and he made this movie. I love him. So that's my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Peace, everybody.